I think no question sparks more debate than the question of which is greater. And so let me see if I can start a few fights today. Shout it out. Which of the following is greater? Cats or dogs? Okay. I think we got a majority dog opinion there. We got some dog lovers. Coca-Cola or Pepsi products? Pretty unanimous for the Coke there. Mountain Dew's pretty good, guys. But okay. Maybe you're more mellow yellow. All right, vacation to the beach or vacation to the mountains? Ooh, a little more scattered there, but I think we got more beach people in the house. All right, which is greater, Chick-fil-A or all the other restaurants in the world combined? All right, one just seems to stand out above the rest. I don't know why. Maybe it's the waffle fries. The question of which is greater has big implications for how you live your life. If you are a dog person that loves sipping a Coke on the beach at a Chick-fil-A, do they make Chick-fil-A's on the beach? Then you're probably going to live life according to what you think is greater. You're going to choose what you believe is greater than. Your greater than is going to shape your life. And this is the big question on the table whenever we read the Exodus story. Who is greater? Is it the gods of Egypt or is it the God of the Hebrews, Yahweh? Which one of these gods is greatest? No doubt this was a question that many would have asked at the time. And in Exodus chapter 5, verse 2, Pharaoh even sneers at the idea and he says, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice?" Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? The 10 plagues of Egypt are meant to directly answer that question. Where Pharaoh says, "I do not know this God," God says, "Well, you're going to know me, okay? You're going to know me by the end of this." The plagues, I want us to understand, these were not just random disasters that God dished out against the Egyptians to make life in Egypt really hard until the point where they're like, okay, fine, your people can go. It was more than that. They were targeted judgments against Egypt's false gods. Each plague, each one of these 10 plagues, striked at a very specific element, a specific part of who these false gods were and what they did. The areas that they supposedly had control over, those were the areas that were targeted by these 10 plagues. And the point was to show how powerless, how ineffective, how impotent these false gods were, and to prove that our God is above them all, that he is without doubt the greatest. He is the ultimate greater than. The Hebrews, they're meant to have a confidence in their God. They're meant to be like a kid in the schoolyard at recess saying, "Hey, my dad can beat up your dad," right? This is maybe a higher elevated level of that, because guess what? Our God beats up these other gods, right? He leaves them in the dust. But you're not going to understand that. You're not going to understand that kind of polemic, anti-Egyptian religion purpose of these plagues. You're not going to understand that critical point if you don't know anything about the Egyptians and their gods. As we study the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, in order to really get what it's trying to say, we need to very often study the cultural context in which it was written, the cultural context in which these events happened. Because guess what? Israel was not called to just worship Yahweh, their God, in isolation. They were called to worship Yahweh in contrast to the very dominant polytheism that surrounded them. Whether it be the Egyptians, whether it be the Babylonians, whether it be the Canaanites. They were surrounded by these pagan gods, and over and over again, God makes himself distinct and demands their worship alone. And so, in order to study this, what I want to do is look at the Egyptians today. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do 4 things. We're going to look at the basic stuff that the Egyptians believed. Number 2, how the 10 plagues directly attacked those beliefs. Number 3, how our God stands distinct and greater than all of those gods, all those other objects of worship. And then finally, number 4, we're going to see how that lesson might apply to our lives today. And so, to start out, what did the Egyptians believe? Like I mentioned before, Egyptian religion was thoroughly polytheistic. They had a pantheon of hundreds upon hundreds of gods, and over the hundreds of years that Egypt existed, in its power, there was evolutions and developments of these gods and how they interacted with one another, how many gods there were, what they were in control of. The gods, you have to understand, they were not distant figures either. They were very, very intimately involved in every aspect of Egyptian life. They actually inhabited the very natural parts of the world. Every single one of them had a key role in the continuing function of how life and order was sustained. And so, for example, Ra, this is probably the most famous of the Egyptian gods. He was the sun god, and he was in control of the sun, the life being sustained every single day. Every single day, he would have made a journey in order to keep the day and night cycles going. Hapi was a god that embodied the annual flooding of the Nile, something that would have brought great fertility to the land. Even ordinary creatures, things that you wouldn't think of as being sacred, like frogs or cows, they were. They became divine symbols for the deities in which they represented. So there was one figure, a goddess named Heket, or Heket, if you want to say it in Hebrew. I'm not very good at my sound in Hebrew yet. This was a fertility goddess that was often depicted with a frog's head. There was another named Hathor, which was a cow goddess associated with motherhood, with joy. And what you'll see is you look at these Egyptian gods, all these kind of animal-human hybrids were very common. And so you see a lot of Egyptian gods with animal heads. We're going to look at some more of these gods in detail later. But what I want you to hear is that every single one of their gods had a very particular domain that they had control over, and each one had its own cult of worship. They were all worshipped in different ways. And to understand the religious system they were in, all these gods collaborated together. They collaborated together with the pharaoh, with the Egyptian priests, with even just the ordinary people for the purpose of maintaining this fragile order of the world. How all of the world functioned, it was kind of a collaborative effort by everyone. And the result of this was something called Ma'at. Ma'at, M-A-A-T, Ma'at. And the concept of Ma'at kind of included this idea of truth, of balance, of justice, of harmony, of everything working together the way that it's supposed to work. And to this end, in order to serve Ma'at and maintain this balance, daily rituals across the temples in Egypt were conducting, offering food to these idols to sustain them, drink, incense, prayer. All these things were meant to feed the gods. These gods were continually sustained by the people. They were fed by them. And by feeding these gods, you would secure their favor. And if you secure their favor, they're more likely to collaborate for the Ma'at. This was absolutely necessary. All these things were done to avoid the opposite of Ma'at, which was called Isfet. Isfet being chaos, right? When the world is plunged into disorder, all that sort of stuff. Therefore, whenever natural disasters struck, whenever things weren't going well for Egypt, all the Egyptians, they looked at the gods and they said, well, we must have messed something up. We must have made you guys mad at me or something. They didn't really know exactly what they wanted, but they just assumed if something bad was happening, then that meant that the gods were angry and we need to try to satisfy them. They would look to Pharaoh to uphold all of this, because Pharaoh, one very interesting thing about his role is he was the bridge between the gods and humanity. He stood as the center of this whole religious system. He wasn't just a political leader. He was the divine son of Ra, the physical embodiment of Horus, and the one who was the guarantor of Ma'at throughout Egypt. And so the Pharaoh's role, he mediated between the human and the divine realms. He oversaw all of the human service to the gods. He oversaw them building up these big, elaborate temples and statues in service to the gods. He oversaw all the temple sacrifices and all these things that would have been done. And if Pharaoh prospered, if he did all the right things, the idea was Egypt is going to prosper. But if Pharaoh messes up, if he doesn't do the stuff, if he fails to control Ma'at, chaos is going to return. If he doesn't appease the gods, if he doesn't work and rally the people together in the right way, then that's on him. That was some serious pressure for Pharaoh. Therefore, what do you think happened? What do you think the Egyptians would have felt whenever the 10 plagues came? That was a very serious attack, not only against the gods, but against Pharaoh himself, right? Because this entire religious system, this whole balance of Ma'at, whenever it gets dramatically disrupted by the 10 plagues, it's a direct attack on the entire system. All the gods and directly Pharaoh, who is supposed to be the one in control of it all. And so, whenever we go into the Exodus story and we read about these 10 different plagues, we see that each one of them targets a specific domain that the gods are supposed to dwell in and be reigning over. And so we see that whenever these plagues begin, God himself, he declares the purpose of the plagues. He says in Exodus 12, verse 12, "On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments." On all the gods of Egypt, I will execute judgments. And so, you might be tempted to call this something dramatic sounding, like, oh, this is a battle of the gods, right? It's Yahweh, the Hebrew God, versus all these Egyptian gods. But maybe that's being a little bit too generous to the Egyptians. This is hardly a battle. This is a slaughter. This is a wipeout. There is no contest. Because the plagues, they show that not only is our God greater than Pharaoh in his pantheon of gods, but he is so supreme in his authority that no authority can exist apart from him. He is the source of all authority, and his authority reaches over every single domain that people claim that his authority is split up under. You cannot read the book of Exodus. You cannot read the Exodus story without catching a very clear twofold declaration. Declaration number one, every rival god is a powerless counterfeit. Every rival god is a powerless counterfeit. These are not real gods. You make them up. You say they have these powers, but these are just powerless counterfeits. And number two, Yahweh alone, the Hebrew God alone, he is the one that is true and sovereign. All these gods, they're not true, but he is the one who is really true. And so let's see how the plagues do this. Let's look at them one by one. The first plague, you might be familiar with probably most, it's the Nile turning to blood. The Nile turns to blood, and as it does so, we read this in Exodus chapter 7, verses 14 through 24, if you want to follow along. It is striking at the center of Egyptian life, right? What was the whole city of Egypt all surrounding? It was the Nile. That was the lifeblood of Egypt, and therefore it was kind of the origin or the place where a lot of the gods had their domain. There were many different Nile gods. One of the most celebrated was one we mentioned earlier, Hapi. They weren't too hoppy. Never mind. Okay. And what Hapi did was she brought the Nile's annual flood, right? The fertility in the land. Other gods of the Nile were also credited for this, including a guy named Khnum. He was the guardian. He was the creator of the Nile. Osiris, another god, his bloodstream was said to be the Nile. And so it's almost like the god of the Israelites were like, oh, you think it's his bloodstream? Let me show you what that actually looks like if that were the case. Another god, Sobek, he was the crocodile god of the Nile. And so presumably, it's interesting, whenever the Nile would turn to blood, you would think all the animals would either die or move out of the Nile while it was nasty like that and stink of death. And so It's almost this idea, if your God can be evicted, how powerful is he really? If all the crocodiles are moving out of the Nile and you got this crocodile God, is your God really all that powerful? You see, by turning this river to blood, Yahweh, he is exposing the impotence of these gods who were supposedly in control of it. The heart of what Egypt was based all around, the first plague completely disrupts that. Because under God's power, all of their promises of fertility, of abundance, all this stuff, it turns to death and stench. The second plague, frogs, we read this in Exodus chapter 8, it turns another fertility symbol into a curse. Frogs, they were sacred. You wouldn't kill a frog in Egypt. But now they're everywhere. They're a problem. And one of the gods, Hechet, I tried it again, Hechet, she was a frog-headed goddess. A goddess of fertility, of childbirth, but even she can't control their increasing multiplication whenever these become a problem. Yet instantly, by Moses' prayer, the God of Israel, they're able to remove them. The third plague, gnats, we read this later in Exodus chapter 8, they arise from the dust itself. They swarm the people, they swarm the animals. And Geb, he was the god of the earth. He was the god of the earth, but yet these bugs coming out of the earth, he couldn't stop. All these things coming out of his domain, he couldn't control. And as a result, one of the most important parts of Egyptian religion, which was a kind of ritual purity, how the priests would clean themselves and shave themselves in specific ways so that they would be worthy and able to offer these sacrifices, this food for the idols, that couldn't happen. It became impossible because everything became unclean as a result of this. There can't be any kind of ordered worship in Egypt as long as this plague is active. Additionally, we have Isis. Isis, she was the god of magic. But the magicians of Egypt, they weren't able to replicate this plague. They were able to kind of replicate the others. But this one, they even confess, hey, this is the finger of God. Pretty big deal when even your magicians say, this is God's work. I can't do anything about this. The fourth plague, flies, it's similar. We have some insect-associated deities like Khepri, who is a scarab beetle god. And even they can't do anything about these buggy torments that are coming up. The fifth plague, death to livestock. We read this in Exodus chapter 9. It attacks both the economy and the religious cult. You see, here in Egypt, livestock were very sacred to the people. They were often the object of worship itself. We had many different kind of bulls called Apis bulls. And these Apis bulls, they were almost considered the physical incarnation form of the god Ptah. Additionally, we had other cow gods and goddesses like Hathor, which was a cow goddess, and Nebis, which was another bull deity. But you can't worship what's been killed, right? Whenever the disease comes and it kills all the livestock, what is God saying? These objects of your worship, what are you going to worship if they're dead? If your gods can't even protect their own sacred animals, how are they going to be able to protect you? The sixth plague, boils, we read in Exodus chapter 9, verses 8 through 12. It renders the people and the animals diseased to the point where their priests, the priests of Egypt, cannot even stand before Moses. Well, what about the gods of healing? What about the gods of life? What about the gods of medicine? There's Sekhmet, there's Imhotep, there's Serapis, there's Isis. Where are they at? Well, if Egyptians' gods, if they were able to heal, why would they neither prevent nor cure this disease across the entire land? Well, I guess they're not as powerful as we thought. The seventh plague, hail and fire, we read about in Exodus chapter 9. It destroys crops and herds from a storm from heaven. As one of my professors said in his best Southern accent, he gave them hail. And I guess that means if the hail is able to come, if they weren't capable of protecting, then these sky gods, these weather gods like Nut, like Shu, like Set, like Horus, they're not able to protect the Egyptians from Yahweh. The eighth plague, Locusts, we read about in Exodus chapter 10. It finishes what that hail began. It devours what remains of the land. All the agricultural, all the fertility gods, Min, Napur, Osiris, they fail to protect the land. They fail to protect what is in their control, what is in their domain. What's funny is that Pharaoh's officials, they actually plead with Pharaoh, just let these Hebrews go already. Don't you know that Egypt is lost? Basically, what are they saying? They're saying, basically tacitly confessing, our gods can't stop this God. Just let him go. Give them what they want. They're more powerful than us. The 9th plague, darkness, we read about in chapter 10. It is an attack against the highest power in Egyptian devotion, Ra, the sun god. For 3 days, light, the daily sign of Ra's rule, it was taken. It vanishes at just Yahweh's command. Israel has light in their dwellings, but the Egyptians are covered in darkness. And this symbolism is absolutely unmistakable. The idea is only the Lord governs the day and the night. Not Ra, not his many other helper sun gods, because there were a bunch of sun gods. None of them control the day or the night. Only God. And zooming back out, or let me continue. The 10th plague, the final one, the death of the firstborn, we read about in chapter 11. This strikes at Pharaoh's house. It strikes at every unprotected home. And you have to think about this. This is the ultimate fulfillment of this attack. Pharaoh, revered as the divine son of Ra, the one whose heart is hardened, that will not let God's people go, that is actively persecuting these Hebrews. This guy who's supposedly the embodiment and of Horus, who's protected by him. He cannot even shield his own heir to the throne. All of the gods that were in control of life and death, they can't do anything about this. Life and death, it's clear, they belong to Yahweh alone. And whenever we look back at everything, what we are seeing is that this Egyptian religion, it offered a really spectacular or really imaginative view of the world. It's cool to study this sort of stuff, to think about how they believed all the world mechanically worked. But ultimately, we see that view proves false and fragile. The plagues of Egypt, they systematically dismantled this Egyptian religious system. One by one, Yahweh was exposing the futility of Egypt's deities. Hapi, he could not protect the Nile. Heket, he could not preserve life. Ra could not bring the sun. And Pharaoh himself could not shield his own household. And this is what sets our God apart as unique. By all these plagues, God is, one by one, distinguishing himself from all these Egyptian gods. All these ancient Near Eastern polytheistic gods, he is separating himself and saying, I stand distinct and different. I declare myself to be the one sovereign Lord of all creation, and I divide my authority with no one. The message is clear. And it's what Exodus 7:5 says, he alone is the Lord. And by the end of this is a testimony not only to the Egyptians, but also to the Israelites. He alone is the Lord. Yahweh, he is not just one power in a crowded pantheon where, okay, you have this responsibility and you have this responsibility. You have this power and you have this power. He commands every sphere. He is ultimate and he is sovereign over everything, whether it be the Nile, whether it be the land, whether it be the sky, whether it be the sun, whether it be the animals, whether it be the crops, whether it be life or whether it be death. God is in control of all of it. Egyptians, they divided the authority over all these things amongst all these multitude of gods. Yahweh claimed sole authority over all creation. Undivided sovereignty. Therefore, what shall we do in light of all this? How does this apply for us today? Maybe this would be an easy application if we were living at this time, but what does this mean for us today? We are called to worship this undivided God with an undivided heart. You see, in Egypt, you could be forgiven for having a scattered worship because, there were a bunch of different gods, and we're called to worship them each. And so you would have had a scattered worship very naturally. But because our God is exclusively God, He requires our exclusive worship. Because God is greater than all these false gods, He is unwilling to share His glory or our affection with any of them. He loves us too much to let us keep clinging to what cannot save. This is such a big deal that whenever we get the Ten Commandments later in Exodus, what is the very first of His commandments? You shall have no other God before me. You see, He is jealous for us. And by jealous, I do not mean something nasty or gross. I don't mean that our God is insecure and feels like He has to compete with these other gods. He doesn't have to compete for people's worship because there is no competition. He is the Creator and the Lord of all, and He makes it clear He is the only one. He is the only one worthy of worship. So He's not competing. He's not being jealous in a bad way. He's being jealous in a proper way as the one who actually possesses all this authority. But here's the thing, God will not force you to choose Him. God, He gives you the choice. In Romans 1, Paul talks a lot about how God gives people over to their various kinds of sin. And that phrase that He gave them over to this sort of stuff does not mean that God caused their descent into idolatry. It means that God allowed their descent into idolatry. It was their choice at the end of the day. And that is the choice, by the way, that Joshua presents to the Israelites in Joshua chapter 24. We read, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And so similarly today, you have the freedom to choose whom you will serve. The choice is up to you about whether or not you will allow your God to be greater than in your life. We talked about this at the beginning, that your life will always follow whatever you treat as greater than. Whatever your greater than is matters because that's what you're going to choose. And so let me ask you today, do you see God as greater than? Do you put something higher than Him, or do you see Him as the ultimate? You see, God, He wants all of you. But think, do you give God all of you? Do you only perhaps give God part of your affection, part of your worship? Is your devotion directed anywhere else? Because if so, Scripture is very clear, that is as much idolatry as the Egyptians worshiping their gods. And so ask this today, where am I still trusting in a false God? Where am I still looking outside of the true God to find something that will secure me, that will satisfy me, that will save me? Whether it be your idols of wealth, of power, of success, of pleasure, of self, God is calling us to trust in Him alone, because whatever your idols may be, Exodus is teaching us two things about them. These are the two things about whatever your idols are, true across the board. Number one is they are going to fail, and number two, God is supreme over them. Those idols, they are going to fail, but God is supreme over them. Just as the Egyptian gods failed whenever they were put to the test, whatever gods you're counting on right now, they're going to let you down too. Proverbs 11:4 says, "Riches do not profit in the day of wrath." Ecclesiastes 2 teaches that pleasure is vapor. Proverbs 23:29 through 35 teaches that wine deceives. Jesus says you can gain the whole world but lose your soul. But here's the good news. You don't have to depend on all that stuff. Even though all these gods, these idols fail us, the true God, He is supreme over all things, and He never fails. And so we actually see that illustrated perfectly in the Exodus story. If you look at what we just read and you think about the whole picture, the Egyptians, they were helplessly relying upon all their false gods to save them, to deliver them from these plagues. But the Israelites, they were preserved. They were saved from these plagues. Why? Was it because they were just so much better people? No. We know that the Israelites were pretty messed up too. Instead, the Hebrews were kept safe not because of the quality even of their faith, but because of the object of their faith. While all these false gods were not worthy of worship and were not able to save, even a mustard seed of faith in the one true God is able to deliver them. And that's what we see. They were kept safe because they trusted in the only God with the true power to save. You see, the finale of this came on the night of the 10th plague, where we actually read about the very first Passover, when Israel was spared by the blood of the Lamb. This was all a picture of what would be to come. Because one day, Jesus, God, becoming man, He would enter the earth, and He would pay the ultimate sacrifice, letting Himself be killed on our behalf so that we could be washed in His blood. He is the ultimate Passover lamb. By His blood, we are similarly saved from sin and from death. Why? Not because of the quality of our faith, but because of the object of our faith, because we trust in Him, the only one who actually has power, the one who is truly greater than anything else we would trust in. Greater than our false gods, greater than our idols, greater than our ambitions, greater than ourselves. Jesus is greater than it all. In a moment, we're going to take the Lord's Supper to remember this reality. One thing I think is interesting whenever you study the Egyptian gods is how they're always offering food to these idols. See, these gods were almost relying on the people to be sustained. See, the Israelites, they would also offer sacrifices to their gods, but God says, I'm not here to eat them. You burn them and you eat them as priests. Okay? God doesn't need to be sustained by us. The truth is that we are actually sustained by Him. It's reversed from what the Egyptians thought. Instead of us offering the ultimate sacrifice to God, actually what we see is He offers the ultimate sacrifice for us. Ultimately, that we would eat from Him. That we would consume His body and His blood and live by it. And that's what we remember whenever we take the Lord's Supper. And as we reflect on this, there is also one thing I would call us to remember, that in Jesus' life, in His death, in His resurrection, it is declared very clearly that He disarmed the rulers and authorities. Every pretend power is dismantled and brought down to the ground because the one with the true authority is brought to light. We see the special moment in time where Jesus is hanging there on that cross, where we are seeing the end of an age and the beginning of a new one. That in His resurrection, He Himself testifies, all authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. And then He calls us to live in Him and to do His work. Therefore, as we take these elements, as we reflect on this truth, I'll call you to think about your own false gods and realize something. Jesus is better. Jesus is greater than. I'm going to leave this picture on the screen as we take the Lord's Supper. And I want to call you to just look at that and realize the reality that whatever you put in that blank there, it is true. Jesus, He is better than my job. He is better than my financial situation. He is better than my relationships. He is better than whatever it is I'm dealing with. And He is better than even the best thing I have in my life. I think staring at something like this is an invitation for us to think about, what should we put in that blank? Take this time, take this moment, fill that blank. Perhaps write some things down. What are the things you need to put in that blank and confess? Jesus is better than this. Jesus is greater than this. Whatever it is I'm trusting in, it's going to fail me, but Jesus, He is supreme over it all. He is the ultimate greater than. And as we take this time to reflect on this, we'll have a moment of stillness. Let me call you to pray this prayer. That just as God dismantled all these idols in order to make His people free, pray that God would do that work in you. That He would expose and dismantle the idols in your life so that you would be freed. That you would no longer cling to all these false things that are less than our God, but you would cling to the one that is greater than everything.